But anyway, with that said, I want to tell you a little bit about a man who's buried here who fought in the American Revolution. If you were a militia member, as he was part of the 3rd Virginia, you could only be called to duty for 90 days. Then they had to wait a year to call you back. George Washington realized there's no way on earth he could ever beat the British with an army that changed every 90 days. When I went through basic training, how long's basic training in the Navy now? 10, 12 weeks?
How long is in basic training?
Basic training.
How long?
Yeah.
I think about 2 months.
Yeah.
6 weeks or 2 months.
See, I went through basic training in the Army, it lasted 10 weeks. My oldest brother went to basic training in the Marines, that lasted 16 weeks. So before you even get them on the battlefield, you spent most of their 90 days in training. So he said, we need a Continental Army. And 1 year before the Declaration of Independence, on what we now call Flag Day, is the Army's birthday, 1775. June 14th, 1775. So we beat the British with a combination of regular full-time military soldiers and militia. Would not have been able to do it without both of them. And that's why today we maintain both a full-time dedicated force and a militia force. In Iraq, several of our militia forces got called up. Afghanistan, several of our militia forces have been called up. They've served around the world, so they're not just part-time soldiers that serve 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks in the summer. It just doesn't work that way anymore. There might have been a day when it did, but not today. So given that little bit of a background of the military forces and what their responsibilities are, let me talk to you a little bit about George Thomason. Like I said, he was part of the 3rd Virginia. Now, if a militia unit joined the Continental Army, they could then, if they had a significant enough percentage, they could then become the 3rd Virginia Continental Line Forces, or whatever other force they were. Lieutenant Colonel Washington, a nephew of George Washington, commanded a Maryland cavalry unit. Significant enough percentage of that Maryland cavalry unit joined the regular forces so they could bring their flag into the Continental Army. So they became known as the Maryland Cavalry Continental Line. Well, George and his wife had one child. And of course it was his turn to come into the militia. But the 3rd Virginia had enough militia soldiers to sign in to the Continental Army that they carried their flag into the Continental Army. And George served something longer than a year. I found muster slips for him both before and after the Battle of Germantown. Well, that's not absolute proof that he was at Germantown, but it's pretty conclusive evidence. Germantown was a nasty battle. The Continental Army and the militia approached Germantown from 4 different highways. And the British, of course, were all throughout Germantown. One British element, however, was in a small little community to the west of Germantown. And because of the fog and because of the lack of visibility, the Revolutionary War soldiers passed that British unit on their approach to Germantown. And those British soldiers knew what was going on and opened fire on the militia from the rear. So they had British regulars in front of them firing at them and British regulars behind them firing at them. So Georgetown was a particularly nasty affair. Well, after he got out of the service, eventually he ends up here in Tennessee. And he has a small farm, and he and his wife have 9 more children. He and his wife are buried just up the hill here. When he was buried there, it was Smith County, where our Representative Weaver is from. It then became part of Cannon County. And now, of course, is part of DeKalb County. So, Revolutionary War hero buried right up here, buried in 3 different counties without ever moving an inch.
Didn't have to move him.
His wife is buried up there. His children were scattered out all over the place. George got a pension, $8 a month. That was big money then. There was no pension system like we have now, where you serve the right number of years, you automatically are enrolled in a pension plan. In those days, every pension application had to go before Congress. And so he applies for a pension, and a year later he's back in federal district court asking, what about my pension? Has anything been done about it? And the answer, of course, was no, because it hadn't made it through all of the, hoops that it had to go through to get it. Now, when he dies, his wife is in terrible, terrible straits. But there is no pension for surviving widows. So once again, she fills out a special application, and it has to go before Congress. Fortunately enough congressmen recognized the value of a surviving widow's having a pension, and she got a pension of $80 a year. And when she died, of course, they interred her right next to her husband, right up the hill here. That's one of the oldest graves up there. We have World War II graves. We have also, now that Bob, where's the mayor? Bob Johnson. Isn't it Bob Johnson? Buried up here? Jennings, yes. Vietnam era veteran. Pulled a couple of tours in South Vietnam. So we have everything from the Revolutionary War to the Vietnam conflict right up the hill. And it's a great day that we have here, a beautiful day. And you all need to thank God, because it was supposed to be raining today, and here we're sitting in bright sunshine and enjoying what we have to say. I thank you very much for being here and sharing with George Thomas's life with me.
Thank you.